All right, so we're at the height of technology here with all of my camera being held over top. So let's take a look at this poem. So on first read, you guys probably think it's just a retelling of the short story, The Painted Door. But I need you guys to think a little bit more deeply about what you are reading and not to read it at face value. So when I'm reading this poem, I'm looking for specific words that have strong feelings associated with them. And when I'm looking at them, I'm looking at the diction. So the diction is the author's word choice. Authors are always going to pick words that are important and have a specific meaning. And so we're going to be looking at connotation. Rather than denotation. I'm going to give you a very quick understanding of what those are. So connotation is the feeling of a word, where denotation is the dictionary definition of that word. So a good example, if I was to call somebody a thin woman, that has a positive connotation, thin. But if I was to say that they're emaciated or they're skinny, again, it means probably the same thing. This woman is quite small, but emaciated has a negative association with that word. So when we understand the connotation of a word, the feeling behind it, what the impression of it is, then we can understand more clearly what the author is trying to tell us. So looking at this poem, there is connotative words at the beginning in this first stanza, but less so than what we see in this second part of the poem. Lorna Crozier also uses this form of poetry, or writing her poetry, called enjambment. And what enjambment means is that the thoughts run over the lines. So the poem, whatever that sentence is, so he clutches barbed wire, blood around his hands, hard as beads, and when they cut him free, bring his body to see her. She sees on his palm a streak of paint. So this is one sentence. Rather than just being on like one line like this, she has little ends. And that's called enjambment. So reading this poem, you need to think of it not as lines. You need to read it looking at the punctuation. So let's start. Another story. This time, the husband, home a night early, leans in the bedroom doorway, freshly painted. His wife thinks she dreams his shadow huge above her as she sleeps in the arms of his neighbor. The next morning, the neighbors find him frozen on his knees, not far from the house. He clutches barbed wire, blood around his hands, hard as beads. And when they cut him free, bring his body to see her, she sees on his palm a streak of paint. So in that first stanza, there's not a lot going on. Like I said, it's pretty much the same retelling of the story, The Painted Door. And so that might have given you guys a little bit of a sense of safety. Maybe you're thinking, oh, this is a pretty easy poem. Not a lot going on here. I don't have to read deeply or think deeply about this poem as I continue onward. But that is not the case. So like I said, a lot of thought, a lot of feeling, a lot of emotions in poetry is condensed into short pieces of literature. So you have to think of each word really importantly. So let's keep going. What's the moral of this tale? Women, you will suffer for your infidelities, be justly punished. Women, appreciate your big silent men, speak to them, learn to listen, though their words are thick and clumsy, hands blunt as blocks of wood. Woman, there is no forgiveness. Don't paint doors or leave them open. Don't believe you dream. So upon first read, it seems very simple, but when we look at it a little bit more different, like more in depth, we can see lots of different things. So first of all, as I'm reading this poem, I'm going to be like, okay, let's find some words here that really stand out to me. So there are a couple words that I think: blunt, thick, clumsy. There are other ways that she could have said that. Blocks of wood. So now these are all descriptions of John or their husband. And now if I was to describe my husband and say, hey, he's thick, he's clumsy, he's got blunt hands that are blocks of wood, that's not necessarily a positive connotation, right? So we haven't really gotten too far here. So that's more of a negative connotation. She's describing John and his hands as a negative type of thing. We can also think maybe thick and clumsy being dumb. Blunt can also be a connotation for not sharp, and sharp being, intelligent. Also, blocks of wood. Why would this person describe the hands as blocks of wood? That makes me think, is it a weapon? So now you might notice, right, I'm just annotating however I feel, right? I don't know for sure that they're saying that these hands are weapons, but that's what it makes me think of. So I've written weapon and then I put a little question mark because maybe that's what it is, okay? Another word that stuck out to me here was appreciate. She's not saying love your husband. She's not saying be enamored by your husband. She's just saying appreciate them. So that's an interesting word to me. I'm going to highlight it because that is a description of their relationship. Now, often I don't actually use different colors when I am annotating, but it might be helpful for you. So I'm trying to use a little bit of different colors for you guys here. Usually I will just use different, like a block or a square around something. I'll use connections. I'll write what I think. I'm a more word person. I like using words to describe things. So for me, I find that more helpful, but you might actually just like to highlight things. Okay, another word that really stuck out to me was suffer. Okay, when we take this word suffer and look at it in terms of everything else that's happening in this part here, I don't get the sense that Lorna Crozier is trying to punish this person. You will suffer means that it's happening to that woman. So yes, that could seem like she's being punished, but the way that it's written and with everything else that goes with it, it gives the sense that even just being with her husband is suffering. Not the infidelity itself, but the fact that she is in this relationship, she is suffering, especially when we look at the enjambment here. So yes, the line goes, woman, you will suffer for your infidelities, be justly punished, but it stops here. Why would Lorna Crozier choose to put suffer here and not continue that thought? When you're writing a poem, you don't just do stuff like this because you feel like it. There is a purpose for it. So I want you to think about that. Why did she put suffer like this? So women, you will suffer. And then it goes on, for your infidelities, be justly punished. So if we read it that way, perhaps you will be punished for your infidelities, but are these two connected? Again, something I'm just thinking about. I haven't come to the conclusion, and that's kind of what you would do at the end of the poem. Okay. Another key word that stuck up to me is this one. Learn to listen. Why does the woman have to learn to listen? Why can't the husband be the one that has to learn to talk? Okay, so these words, suffer, appreciate, learn, they all tie in for me to the description of the relationship, whereas these ones in the squares are descriptions of the husband. So looking at this, I have a different reading or understanding of it than some of you might have. Now, I'm not going to tell you what my thoughts are on that because I am hoping that through this annotation and this looking at these words specifically in this stanza will help you to come to a different conclusion. But there's one more thing that I want to talk about. We haven't looked at this last stanza here. So this lesson that Lorna is teaching us, she says, women, there is no forgiveness. Don't paint doors or leave them open. Don't believe you dream. So we have to think a little bit here about what is the symbolism of this painted door. What is the symbolism of leaving the door open? What is the symbolism of dreaming. And I think that that's kind of where the key understanding of this poem will come from. So we get a little bit of it right here, but this is the key thing. So a door, what does doors symbolize, sorry. So that's how I would annotate that. What's the point of that? And then maybe I'd think about it a little bit more, like freedom, right? If we're not in a cage, we've got doors, ability to escape. Ability to escape. There are other things, but I can't think of them right now, but that's kind of like what the point of a door is. And it's important because we're not focused on this paint part. I would maybe even just cross that out because we're focused on this part. Don't leave them open. Your door should always be closed. You shouldn't be having ideas. You shouldn't be having thoughts. You shouldn't be thinking of how to be free. And that ties into this last part. Don't believe you dream. So yes, dream up here, right? We're talking about the literal understanding of that dream, but dreams can also mean goals. So again, we have to have an understanding that words can mean more than one thing. We can't look at poems as just surface value. Poems have so much emotion put into them in such a small space that we have to look at each thing very carefully and very clearly so that we can understand what the author is actually trying to say. So what's the moral of this tale? Crozier is not saying don't cheat. And now let's be clear here, I'm not saying that we should all go out and be cheating on people, but she's saying there's more nuance to this story than the first read would say. She's asking you to look at Anne in a different light rather than just some woman who went off and cheated on her husband because she felt like it. She's asking you to think about what was happening to Anne and how that could have made her feel and how that could have pushed her in a certain direction. And so these poems, these especially these last two lines or stanzas here, are asking you to explore that thought, to explore why does she do these things. And so I want you guys to go back, look at this poem again, and think about how could you understand it, looking at specific words, and think about also the answer that you gave. So I'm going to allow all of you to rewrite the very last question on your painted door because not a single student got it, one student got it correct. So you guys all have the opportunity now to go back, look at this poem again, and think about what is Lorna Crozier actually trying to say? Because most of you missed that, okay? So resubmit that part of your question for full marks.